Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Peter Voltsinas. I'm one of the co-presidents of the University of Toronto Sports and Entertainment Law Society. Thank you again for joining us for the final round of what is the second annual High School Hockey Advocacy Competition of Canada, co-hosted by Dominion Mock Trial and the University of Toronto Sports and Entertainment Law Society. We've had an excellent weekend so far of truly remarkable oral advocacy, culminating in this final round of competition. And I'd just like to thank, before we begin, all our volunteers and contestants for their time and commitment to making this competition a success. This arbitration proceeding concerns the matter of Jesse Puljujärvi versus the Edmonton Oilers. And before we begin, I'd just like to officially introduce our guest arbitrator for the final round, Richard McLaren. We are absolutely thrilled to host Richard as our guest arbitrator this afternoon. Richard is counsel to the law firm Mackenzie Lake Lawyers, LLP. He's also a professor of law at the University of Western Ontario. He has 40 years of experience as a commercial lawyer, a labor and commercial arbitrator, and a mediator. He also holds memberships in the Court of Arbitration for Sport, the Beijing Arbitration Commission, the London Court of International Arbitration, and the Dubai International Arbitration Center, just to name a few. Finally, and perhaps most relevantly, Richard has served with distinction as an arbitrator for NHL salary arbitration proceedings and more recently, player-agent disputes, the NHLPA. Thank you so much for your time, Richard. And without further ado, I will pass it on to you to bring this proceeding to order.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter, and good afternoon to all of you. I won't say any more about myself, except I'm very pleased to be able to provide you with this arbitration experience, and I'm looking forward to a good moot competition between everybody. And I probably will I'll try and ask each one of you at least one question, maybe more, as we go along. Please remember to go slowly, speak slowly. I think you probably already learned all of that from being in the finals. And so unless there's any need for anything else in the way of preliminaries, which I don't believe there is, I would ask the counsel first for the player, and then the counsel, counsel for the player introduce himself and his or her team, and the same for the club. And then we'll start the actual moot presentation. So introductions, go ahead, counsel for the player.
Thank you, arbitrator. My name is Fiona Wells and my colleague's name is Angela G. So we will represent the player, Mr. Jesse Puljujärvi, in this arbitration between Mr. Puljujärvi and the Oilers. I'm sorry, should we provide our full introduction now?
No, I just want, this is the introduction.
Okay.
Who you are. I want to get everybody placed on the screen so I
Understood.
Can understand what's going on.
Hi, my name is Angela G, and I'm also representing the player in this arbitration.
Hello, I'm counsel. Good afternoon, Mr. Arbitrator. I'm James Liu, counsel for the Edmonton Oilers, and I am here with my co-counsel, Yu Hung Guan.
Just having trouble seeing is your co-counsel on the screen?
Yeah, my name's Yu Hung Guan. I'm also the co-counsel.
Okay. Let me just get my screen set up here. All right. Who's going first for the player?
I will be going first.
Okay, so that's Angela, correct?
Fiona.
Fiona, I'm sorry.
No problem.
All right. So please go ahead with the presentation on behalf of the player.
Thank you. So given the relevant considerations, which we will discuss in greater detail later, we submit that Mr. Puljujärvi's salary for the 2022-23 season should be $3.6 million. We will be submitting three comparable players, Anthony Beauvillier, Kasperi Kapanen, and Jesperi Kotkaniemi. We will focus.
Could you just slow down a minute, please, so that I can get these noted? Yes, go ahead. Of course. Just repeat that, please.
So the three comparable players are Anthony Beauvillier, Kasperi Kapanen, and Jesperi Kotkaniemi. We will focus primarily on each player's performance in their platform year, as that information is most up to date and most relevant to understanding how they were situated before signing their respective contracts. So when comparing him against these similar players, Mr. Puljujärvi routinely provides superior offensive and reliable defensive contributions. I will first discuss our methodology for selecting these comparable players, then submit our first comparable player. My colleague Angela will then submit the second and third comparable players. So beginning with our methodology for selecting these comparable players, we had a strong preference towards contracts that were signed more recently, as these are more reflective of the current market in which Mr. Puljujärvi will be signing his contract. We looked generally for players with similar statistical profiles as an indicator of their value being comparable. And as we can see, Puljujärvi is primarily an offensive player. That's where most of his value to the team comes from. This is evidenced by the fact that, for example, he receives more power play time and no shorthanded time. And so we will therefore be weighing offensive metrics more heavily. This does not mean that we will completely disregard defensive metrics, which are still important for assessing his overall value. It just means that they are somewhat less relevant to the style of play that Puljujärvi primarily provides. So we will be looking further for players with a similar usage, so that is to say more power play time and less shorthanded time, as an indicator of their filling a similar role within their teams. So this brings us to our first comparable player, Anthony Beauvillier. Anthony Beauvillier is a 25-year-old left winger for the New York Islanders, and he signed his current contract worth an average annual value of $4.15 million for 3 years on September 1st, 2021. Comparing Beauvillier and Puljujärvi's platform years, we can see that both players were comparably situated. So looking first at their offensive metrics in their platform years, Puljujärvi had 0.55 points per game in 65 games played, whereas Beauvillier had 0.6 points per game in 47 games played. And it is important to note as well that Beauvillier received more power play time than Puljujärvi in his platform year, 1 minute and 49 seconds for Beauvillier compared to 1 minute and 28 seconds for Puljujärvi. And this explains some of the gap in their offensive production. The fact that he receives more power play time means that Beauvillier is given more opportunities in offensive situations. And with this in mind, it makes it more impressive that Puljujärvi has managed to achieve comparable offensive metrics without receiving the same power play opportunities. So looking now at their defensive metrics in their platform years, which are, as I mentioned, less relevant in the case of two offensively oriented players, but defensive metrics are still important to consider as forwards do often find themselves in defensive situations. In their platform years, Puljujärvi had 1.25 hits per game, 0.23 blocks per game, and 0.42 takes per game, compared to, for Beauvillier, 0.83 hits per game, 0.28 blocks per game, and 0.32 takes per game. So overall, we can see that Beauvillier had marginally better offensive metrics, whereas Puljujärvi had overall better defensive metrics, including substantially more hits per game, which indicate that they provided an overall comparable value. Beauvillier is a particularly strong comparable player for Puljujärvi because of their similar deployment in terms of their time on ice. Neither play significant time shorthanded, and both play substantial amounts of time on the power play, although Beauvillier plays more, as I mentioned earlier. They further had extremely similar time on ice in their platform years, 16 minutes and 24 seconds for Beauvillier compared to 16 minutes and 14 seconds for Puljujärvi. And this similar situational usage is a reflection of their similar playing style. We can also see both players have similar trends throughout their career. And in particular, both of their points per game followed a similar upwards trend. So Puljujärvi's annual points per game beginning in the 2016-17 season went 0.29 in that season, then 0.31, 0.2, 0.45, and then finally 0.55 in his platform year. Similarly, Beauvillier's annual points per game beginning in the 2016-17 season went 0.36 in that season, then 0.51, 0.35, 0.57, then 0.6. So both had their highest points per game. Oh, sorry.
I'd like to stop you there because I'm just looking at the statistics, and Beauvillier has played 333 games to his platform year. And the player at arbitration has 259, I think.
Yeah.
That's a considerable difference. You also indicated that he's stronger perhaps on defense than offense. Also, the 3-year average annual value, it runs out in the current season, right?
Yes, that contract was signed in 2021.
Okay. Does that impact the value of looking at it as a comparator?
Sure. So I can speak about the factor of games played. So as you mentioned, Puljujärvi has played 259 games compared to 333 for Beauvillier. And while on its face, this may seem like a concerning gap, It's important to note that Puljujärvi had significantly more games played in his platform year, 65, compared to 47 for Beauvillier, and their platform years are where we've been drawing most of the statistics we're looking at, as they provide more recent and up-to-date information. And the disparity in games played is also partly attributable to Puljujärvi having played substantially fewer games in his first season. In his first season, he played 28 games, whereas Beauvillier played 66 games. And so this shouldn't be discounted entirely, but information from their first season is not really as up-to-date for this particular negotiation. We can also see Puljujärvi's games played per season trending upwards strongly.
Thank you. What about the fact that this contract is basically ends in the current season? Doesn't really reflect current market values, does it?
So it was
the market value 3 years ago when the contract was signed.
Yeah, it was signed in 2021, so that would be 2 years before. So the information is, of course, the marketplace would have changed somewhat, but this was one of the more up-to-date comparable players. And we think that given their styles of play and the trends throughout their career are very similar, this is still a useful comparable player to consider.
All right, thank you.
So I will pass it off to my colleague who will submit our remaining 2 comparable players.
I will now speak about our remaining 2 comparables, first of which is Kasperi Kapanen, and then I will talk about Jesperi Kotkaniemi. For Kasperi Kapanen, he is a 26-year-old right winger with the Pittsburgh Penguins. Mr. Kapanen signed his current contract worth an average annual value of $3.2 million for a term of 2 years on July 21st, 2022. In terms of offensive metrics, Puljujärvi had better offensive metrics in his platform year. He had 0.55 points per game, including 14 goals, whereas Kapanen only had 0.41 points per game. In terms of their defensive metrics, they have quite comparable defensive metrics in their platform year, with Kapanen having the slight edge. Kapanen had 1.39 hits per game compared to Puljujärvi's 1.25. He had 0.24 blocks per game compared to Puljujärvi's 0.23, and he had 0.51 takes per game compared to Puljujärvi's 0.42. Overall, Puljujärvi had a stronger positive offensive impact during his platform year. And while this might be marginally offset by Kapanen's slightly better defensive metrics, both players provide similar value. And we submit that as wingers, their main job is to generate offense. So we are weighing their offensive metrics more heavily than their defensive metrics. Kapanen provides a good comparison as neither players kill penalties on their current team, meaning that they both fill a similar role within their team and are deployed similarly by their coaches. Overall, as we are weighing offensive metrics more heavily than defensive metrics, Puljujärvi is a stronger player overall for his team. I will now be moving on to our last comparable, Jesperi Kotkaniemi.
Just before you do, with Kapanen, he signed his contract in July 2022, correct?
Yes.
So the average annual value is 33.2 million.
Yeah.
What was the contract in the prior year?
I do not.
Reason for my question, if you can't give me an answer right off the top, is that really reflects the current marketplace, doesn't it? Because it's signed within the year that the player at arbitration is looking for the same one-year contract.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm just trying to determine what the range of possible values might be for these comparators. So effectively, that's his current year contract value.
Yes. So this would be a value that would be very recent and reflective of the marketplace.
So quite a bit lower than the 3.6 million you're asking for.
Yes, but as we've submitted, we believe that his stronger offensive contributions make Puljujärvi a better player overall for the team.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, being a better player statistically isn't necessarily a full answer, because what you're looking for is the marketplace range in order to determine what the player at arbitration should get. Now it's part of the equation, but the actual salary valuations are extremely important as well.
Oh, yes, I
So I have
believe,
a question.
oh yeah,
Go
our
ahead.
third comparable has a significantly higher salary, so I think this would be like a good middle place. So moving on to our third comparable, Jesperi Kotkaniemi. He is a 22-year-old center with the Carolina Hurricanes. Mr. Kotkaniemi signed his current contract worth an average annual value of $4.82 million for a term of 8 years on March 21st, 2022. It's important to note that he signed his contract midway through his contract year, so we will be focusing on per game metrics as opposed to total values. We will also look at the year prior to the contract year in order to have a larger sample size to compare with, as we've seen his team did the same prior to signing him. In terms of their offensive metrics,
Just before
Kotkaniemi-
you get to the offensive metrics, I want to focus on the average annual value for a moment, please. At 4.8 million, what is that's the average annual value across the contract? Is there a balloon at the end at the 8 years? What is the contract value for the first year, which would be the current season, correct? Yes.
I do not believe we were provided with the
You
information.
don't know the
on-
answer to that. Okay,
Yeah.
that's fine. Go ahead.
In terms of offensive metrics, Kotkaniemi had 0.39 points per game compared to Puljujärvi's 0.55 points per game. Kotkaniemi also had 0.36 points per game in the year prior to his contract year. Considering the unique situation as he signed midway through his contract year, we would also like to look at his career offensive metrics. Puljujärvi has a career points per game of 0.38 compared to Kotkaniemi's 0.37 points per game. So they are extremely comparable in terms of their career offensive metrics. In terms of their defensive metrics, in his platform year, Puljujärvi had 1.25 hits per game compared to Kotkaniemi's 1.1. He had 0.23 blocks per game compared to Kotkaniemi's 0.25, and he had 0.42 takes per game compared to Kotkaniemi's 0.34. In terms of these defensive metrics, Puljujärvi has a slightly better defensive metric, but they're still comparable. They have very similar time on ice, so Puljujärvi in his contract year had in his career had 13 minutes and 59 seconds, whereas Kotkaniemi had 13 minutes and 20 seconds. They also do not play significant time shorthanded, but they do play power play time. We submit that there is a significant difference between the two positions as Kotkaniemi plays center, which requires more two-way play and is a more unique and valuable role to the team, which explains the almost $1 million in difference of salary requested. As we can see through these examples, Puljujärvi routinely outperforms comparable players, providing clear offensive and comparable defensive value. Given the statistical profiles and contracts of these comparable players, Jesse Puljujärvi should be paid no less than $3.6 million for the 2022-2023 season.
One follow-up question. Kotkaniemi is a center player, and the player at arbitration is a winger. Are those really comparable positions to be comparing the statistics of? A center is a very different role to play than a winger.
Yes, we believe that a center does have a very different role than a winger, especially in terms of metrics like face-offs. But we also believe that as they're both forwards, their main job is to generate offense for a team. So it is still reasonable to compare their offensive metrics. And as there's an emphasis on two-way play for centers, we know that the role is more valuable to the team overall and provides its own difficulties, which is why we believe that Mr. Kotkaniemi is worth more overall as a player and merits a higher salary than the salary we are requesting for Mr. Puljujärvi.
I think his salary so much beyond what you're asking for is probably put him outside the pool of comparable players.
We still submit that it's a very similar contract as it was signed in the right year, and they still have a similar role to the team overall beyond the distinction of center and winger.
Well, your similar role is the basic saying that they're all forwards. They're both forwards.
Yeah, they provide offensive impact.
Right, but there's quite a difference in function, I think, of a center than a winger. But I hear what you have to say. Thank you. I'm not sure if your time's up or not. I don't know.
Oh, I think we were finished with our submission.
You were, okay. Sorry, my question ran a little over time. I apologize. All right, well, thank you both counsel for the submissions on behalf of the player. Let's turn to the club and hear what they have to say, and who's proceeding first of the two counsel?
Counsel James Liu will be proceeding first.
Go ahead, James.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Arbitrator. Now, given the 3 submissions that my co-counsel and I will deliver, we submit a salary request for Mr. Puljujärvi with the annual average value of $3.15 million for the upcoming season. In our 3 submissions, we will be focusing on the 3 pillars to the value of a forward player. These 3 pillars are first offensive value, versatility, and finally player experience. I'll be briefly going over the first pillars and explaining their importance, and proceeding with focusing on the offensive value of a forward player. So to begin with, a way to evaluate the offensive value of a player is power play time on ice per games played, which best reflects a team's trust on a player's offensive abilities during an advantageous situation. Well, this is important to factor in because of the fact that we both take into consideration individual contribution on the ice, as well as the team trust of the player's offensive capabilities to put him on the ice during a power play situation. Then the second pillar being player experience. This is best reflected through games played, which a more experienced player will be able to lead the team and deal with high pressure situations because of the fact that they have been in this position various times before, given their high games played. Finally, the third and last pillar, which my co-counsel will also cover, shorthanded time on ice, which reflects player versatility. Now, combined with the first 2 pillars, being offensive value and experience, shorthand time on ice shows us how versatile and how well-rounded a player truly is. In the sense of a forward player, defense is not necessarily going and standing behind the net or standing next to the net and intercepting your opponents coming to the net. But rather, as a forward player, defense can mean acquiring the puck on the other side of the ice, on the side of your opponent, in order to score. This is what defense means to a forward player. Now, while shorthanded time on ice is not mandatory to a reasonable salary, such as $3 million, for a forward player, it does play a big and major factor in higher salaries, such as those approaching $4 million. Now moving on to my submission on the importance of an offensive value, specifically power play time on ice. When establishing offensive value, it's crucial that we look at power play time on ice. As stated before, it shows team contribution and individual contribution. We'll be looking at 3 comparable players' power play time on ice per game in their platform year, as the platform year best reflects a player's most updated and most recent statistics, giving it significant value to the contract signing process. We can analyze the importance and industry standard for power play time on ice per games played by the 3 comparisons of 3 players who are all wingers. Starting off with, if I may direct your attention to Mr. Yamamoto. He has a 2-year contract. Sorry, Mr. Kaylor Yamamoto.
Oh, Kaylor, okay. Yes, okay.
He has a 2-year contract signed in 2022. And if I may direct your attention to his power play time on ice per games played, he has a 49-second power play time on ice. And in turn, he received a $3.1 million salary. On to the second player, if I may direct your attention to Mr. Connor Brown. Mr. Brown has a 3-year contract signed in 2021, and his power play time on ice is 1 minute and 40, whereas Mr. Puljujärvi only has 1 minute and 28. Connor Brown's salary was $3.6 million. Finally, if I may turn your attention to Mr. Anthony Beauvillier. He has a 3-year contract signed in 2021, and his power play time on ice is 1 minute and 49 seconds, whereas again, Mr. Puljujärvi only has 1 minute and 28. Mr. Beauvillier's salary annual average value was $4.15 million. It is evident that an upwards change in the power play time on ice statistic can lead to increases in player salaries, and obviously the industry values this very much in the sense of a forward player.
Let me just stop you there if I could, please. And Mr. Beauvillier is at 3.15 million, and you're saying that this player should be 3.15 million. And I noticed that both sides use this particular player as their comparator, but that comparator puts his salary considerably above the range, well over $1 million more than you're proposing. Why?
Mr. Arbitrator, in this sense, we're establishing how the hockey industry values power play time on ice, and seeing an increase, a significant, almost 10-second increase between Mr. Anthony Beauvillier and Mr. Connor Brown. It shows us how much the industry values power play time on ice per games played in the sense of a forward player.
I see.
Now,
okay.
No problem. In order to compare Mr. Puljujärvi's offensive value to others, we will be taking a look at two of the previously mentioned players, Connor Brown and Kale Yamamoto. These contracts are both similar in length. Starting off with Mr. Connor Brown, who has a 3-year contract, again for a $3.6 million salary. His power play time on ice per games played is significantly higher than Mr. Puljujärvi by 113%. Now, given the rare presence of power play, this 10-second difference is absolutely significant. It means that, recalling the aforementioned industry standard, Jesse Puljujärvi should not receive a higher salary than Mr. Connor Brown, as his power play time on ice is lower. Objectively speaking, Connor Brown is also more well-rounded, poses more offensive value, has more experience, and is more versatile. Then with Mr. Kale Yamamoto, 2-year contract, $3.1 million salary, who has a 49-second power play time on ice per games played, while Jesse has a 1 minute 28 seconds power play time on ice per games played. Even if it's the case that Mr. Puljujärvi does have a higher power play time on ice, we submit that Kale Yamamoto is more versatile, more well-rounded, and has more defensive value, which is where Jesse Puljujärvi lacks in versatility and well-roundedness. Puljujärvi possesses little to no defensive value in the sense that he is not trusted with shorthand time on ice, as his platform year shorthand time on ice is 0 seconds. Now, while we do recognize that Mr. Puljujärvi poses a good offensive value in terms of power play time on ice, there are 3 pillars in determining a player's value. And Mr. Arbitrator, may I have a brief indulgence to conclude my submissions?
You just conclude this one point, yes, please.
Right. Mr. Puljujärvi does lack experience in both terms of experience and versatility. In order to reach a salary near $4 million, we submit that Mr. Puljujärvi does need to up on his defensive statistics and his versatility, meaning that we're still prepared to offer him a salary of $3.15 million. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, James. Then your co-counsel is...
Afternoon, Mr. Arbitrator. I'm Counsel Yuhong Guan, and I'll be delivering the final 2 statements, submissions today on behalf of the Edmonton Oilers. The first being with respect to the importance of experience, second being with respect to the importance of versatility, and how Mr. Puljujärvi lacks in both these 2 regards. These submissions will corroborate our requested $3.15 million salary. First, with respect to the importance of well-roundedness as a forward. To reiterate, there are 3 core pillars in a forward of importance. First, offensive performance, second, player experience, and third, versatility. A well-rounded forward in 3 of these pillars will have a high salary. 1 or 2 of these aspects being high is simply not enough to receive a salary comparable or higher to that of Connor Brown. First, let's do an analysis of Connor Brown. He has a $3.6 million average annual value of their 3-year contract. They have 0.61 points per game, 1 minute and 40 seconds in power play time on ice, a total of 324 NHL career hockey games, and 2 minutes 36 seconds in shorthand time on ice. Connor Brown is an extremely well-rounded forward and is able to contribute offensively with high power points per game and power play time on ice. He's also a veteran who knows how to capitalize on opportunities with high games played and is able to be versatile with his play style. So then why is our $3.15 million figure reasonable? In a joint analysis of Denis Gurianov, who is a winger, and Jesse Puljujärvi, we can see numerous parallels. Denis Gurianov has a salary of $2.9 million average annual value of their 1-year contract. So let's take a look at his stats. Denis Gurianov has an outstanding minute and 58 power play time on ice, with a reasonable 0.42 points per game in their platform year. However, they have only 214 games played and 0 shorthand time on ice per game. This low games played figure means he's less experienced and capable of capitalizing on opportunities, and the 0 shorthand time on ice means he isn't as versatile and plays as a strictly offensive forward. This all contributes to his relatively lower 2.9 million average annual value, and it shows that versatility is an important metric that without versatility will limit the salary to around 3 million. So let's take a look at Puljujärvi's stats. Puljujärvi has a great 0.55 points per game, a reasonable minute and 28 power play time on ice, but only 259 games played and also 0 shorthand time on ice. He has 65 fewer games than Connor Brown, which I previously mentioned, and a lot of valuable career experience because of this lower games played figure is unfortunately not there. Recall that for a forward to be well-rounded, they must have 3 elements at a reasonably high amount to be considered an industry well-rounded forward. The fact that he's similar to Mr. Gurianov, lacks a full season's worth of experience and are not at all versatile with 0 shorthand time on ice means that their salary will be limited. Versatility is further especially important to wingers like Kalier Yamamoto. Yamamoto's stats, while seemingly lower at first, are highly comparable to Mr. Puljujärvi. For their contract analysis, they have 3.1 million average annual value. They have a 2-year contract, which is similar to the 1 year in this case. And in regards to their statistics, they have 0.5 points per game, but they have a lacking 0.49 power play time on ice, and are lacking with 186 games played. Now, while seemingly having lower offensive statistics, it is made up for by his defensive abilities, with 1 minute and 9 seconds shorthand time on ice, which is a substantial statistic to be taken into account. Because if he is lacking in one regard, in regards to power play time on ice, it is made up for by his shorthand time on ice and defensive abilities, which is why, however, he's still lacking in his games played, which is why his salary is a little bit lower at 3.1 million. So then why is our 3.15 million figure reasonable? Well, when compared to Yamamoto, they are much the same players. They lack in one aspect and they make up for it in the 2 other pillars. It can be said that Jesse Puljujärvi is marginally better as a result of their higher points per game, power play time on ice, and overall games played, which is why we are offering Mr. Puljujärvi a salary higher than Yamamoto's at 3.15 million. However, Yamamoto's defensive capabilities pose great versatility as a forward, something which Mr. Puljujärvi lacks in its entirety. If I could direct you to Puljujärvi's shorthand time on ice again, it is a flat 0. And that's really why we can't offer much more to Puljujärvi, who's an exclusively offense-oriented forward. And he isn't especially outstanding with his forward statistics, with only 0.55 points per game and 1 minute and 28. This is lower than many other players who are receiving closer to 4 million, like Connor Brown. And when the team needs defensive skills most and versatility, something to note is that when they're short a player and need someone with strong defensive capabilities, they do look past Puljujärvi, instead opting for Yamamoto, who is more versatile forward and also on the same team as Puljujärvi. Mr. Arbitrator, Puljujärvi would no doubt be a valuable asset to the Edmonton Oilers. He's a strong scorer, a remarkable player points-wise, but when compared to our friends, other players, experience, versatility, and offensive performance-wise, our friend's proposed salary just seems a little too high. Currently, a 3.15 million salary is simply the most suitable, being backed up by both statistics and a high degree of versatility. And without that experience and versatility, he lacks 2 of the central pillars for a high salary around 4 million. Barring any further questions, that concludes our submissions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your presentation. All right, that concludes the opening round of each side. Now we need to turn to the reply or rebuttal side and listen to, first of all, the player's position, and then we'll listen to the club's position. And Fiona, will you be going first in the reply, or is only one of you doing the reply?
Angela seems to be having some issues with Wi-Fi, so I will be providing the rebuttals.
I noticed there was some technical difficulty with Angela's presentation. She froze a couple of times.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, so you're going to do the entire reply. Go ahead.
Thank you. So we would like to begin with our concerns with the 3-pillar model that our friends relied on, and then also provide some more discussion and analysis of the comparable players of Connor Brown, Kyler Yamamoto, and Denis Gurianov. These pillars seem somewhat arbitrary, and they don't necessarily account for the fact that a player's role is dictated by their team context. So for example, the pillar of offense, we seem to rely very heavily on the use of power play time as an indicator of offensive value, which we would submit does not necessarily capture a player's offensive value in full, and it is often more reflective of the team situation rather than an individual player's offensive capabilities. So for example, when we're looking at Beauvillier and Puljujärvi, a gap of 10 seconds is not particularly significant, particularly considering that the Oilers are a team with a lot of high-end offensive talent, and it would be unfair to punish Puljujärvi for playing for a team with a stronger power play compared to some of the other players. 5-on-5 offense is, if anything, considered more valuable, and it would not be desirable for all of a player's offense to be reliant on their power play time. 5-on-5 time makes up a far greater percentage of players' total time on ice. Most players play no more of the comparables submitted than 2 minutes overall, but have total ice times of 14 minutes, indicating that they spend more of their time on even strength. So on the topic of versatility, we would further note that Beauvillier has no shorthanded time, neither does Kapanen with his current team, and yet both still have higher salaries. And then similarly to our concern with power play time as an indicator of offensive value, shorthanded time is not the be-all and end-all of defensive metrics. We can see that Puljujärvi is as a winger, offensively oriented player, but still has solid defensive statistics in terms of his hits and takes, indicating that he is defensively reliable. On the topic of player experience, if we look at aging curves for forwards, if anything, it would be more desirable to have the players when they are generally younger during their athletic peak. And although experience can be valuable, it's more important that players are at their best physically, as opposed to prioritizing experience, which often comes from age. So now moving to discuss Connor Brown. Connor Brown's platform year was 2019-2020, that season. So this information is really not up to date or reflective of the current market, particularly considering that he signed right after the shortened season due to COVID, when there was significant uncertainty around how the salary cap would be impacted by the declining league revenue. And in this time, the market has changed, meaning that Connor Brown is not really reflective or indicative of the current market. In terms of Kyler Yamamoto as a comparable, we will note also that he has significantly lower production in his platform year, so 0.51 points per game compared to 0.55, which, as we mentioned earlier, considering they are both wingers, their offensive statistics are more important to their overall value for their team. And then for Denis Gurianov, he's additionally had, much like Yamamoto, weaker offensive statistics in his platform years. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Now, let's turn to give me a moment, please. Keep all my paperwork straight here. Okay. The reply on behalf of the club, is it going to be done by both of you or one of you?
I will be doing the rebuttal speech for team side.
Okay, go ahead then, please.
Thank you, Mr. Arbitrator. Now, to begin with addressing the player side submissions, the player side weighs offensive metrics very heavily, which does provide for the value of a forward player as stated in one of our 3 pillars. But to reiterate, a defense for a forward may be intercepting the puck on the opponent's side in order to quickly score goals. This means that defensive metrics, according again to our 3 pillars about versatility, would still be weighed very heavily, given that the player side is requesting for a high salary of $3.6 million. Even though Mr. Puljujärvi does have good offensive capabilities, his defensive abilities, his versatility, his well-roundedness is simply not at the bar yet for the $3.6 million salary. Now, moving on to the player side's submission regarding their comparable player of Mr. Kotkaniemi, my friend on the player side relies heavily on Kotkaniemi's per game statistics, which are more insightful in this case, as the contract was signed halfway through the season. It does not reflect on the player as a whole. meaning that Kotkaniemi is not the best comparison when it comes to the case. Finally, my friends on the player side also submitted that our pillar structure is very arbitrary and said that a player's position determines what they do and what opportunities they receive on the ice. Rather, it's the player. If the player is good at offensive capabilities, then they'll obviously be put into an offensive position. It means that if a player is good at something, it determines what they do on the ice. It determines their position. Nobody will put a goalie with no offensive skills as a forward in order for them to quickly score goals, but to rather specialize their capabilities and their uniqueness. And again, Mr. Puljujärvi has yet to meet the fact that he is not as experienced, he's not as versatile as the other comparables used in our submissions, and therefore we're still stand by the offer of $3.15 million for the upcoming season. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, that concludes the presentations of both parties, and I'd like a few minutes to think about what I'd like to, how I'm going to decide this and let you know that, and then I'll turn to making some comments about your presentations. So I'm just going to ask the organizer to put me in a breakout room for a few minutes, and then I'll be back with you shortly. Just waiting for the council to turn on their videos. One more to go, I think. There we go. Good. All right. Well, that was extremely well done by both sides, and I'm impressed at the quality of your studying and preparing and your analysis. Let me give you a few general comments about advocacy, and also advocacy in the context of this kind of salary arbitration, which is highly unusual. The NHL is one of the few bodies in the world that uses this kind of salary arbitration process. The baseball one is extremely divergent and different from hockey. One of the real skills of an advocate is to take a complex problem, reduce it to its fundamental points or core points or key points, and then emphasize those, and not to get distracted in the presentation by looking at everything that could be looked at. That is the very unique skill of advocates, to be able to take a complex situation, describe it in a way which a reasonably intelligent person can absorb, understand, and deal with. You all exhibit those skills. You, of course, need to develop them a bit more. And you learn over time also to how to approach the other side's position. We'll speak about that when we get to the reply side of the arguments here. So that's my general feelings. In the actual salary arbitration procedures that I was involved in, I did this for, I think, 9 years with the NHL and the PA. Is a little bit different because there's a broader range. Necessary to this problem is to keep it within the bounds of what you can deal with in such a short time. But you would find in an actual one that there would be, first of all, reference to cases, prior decisions by the salary arbitrators, which are not part of this procedure, but are part of the NHL one. And they have some role to play as well in this, and they have quite a key role to play, actually. Let me also turn to one other point that I noticed, and I think this applies to all of you. You all have a very good understanding of the statistics. That's great. And you need that background. That's an important part of preparation, to really understand your case. The more you prepare, the better you'll be in being able to express whatever it is you want to achieve. So you're all extremely well prepared and understand the statistics. Now think about it in terms of me listening to you and what I have to decide, because I don't have the same mastery of the statistics. Even I did look at all of this material, and I did come to my own view of where I thought it should be, based on nobody having any presentation to me, just on my experience. But you want to be able to capture the key points and explain them in your presentation. This is why I think the salary ought to be X, and make the points. Now, the Council for the Players did that by way of a theme, the 3 pillars that they had. Third Council for the Player focused more on the statistics. It's very difficult to absorb statistics and then use them. So tying the statistics to something, and what I would do on the player side is I would have tied the statistics more to the actual monetary value that you're claiming for. No 2 players are ever wholly comparable, no matter how much detail you go into. They all have some uniqueness to them, and the way to get the statistics to play a role in the salary arbitration is to tie the 2 together a little bit more than was actually done on the player side. Let me turn to the reply, and then I'm going to, if I might, just make a few comments about each of your presentations. So let's go to the reply for a moment. There's a couple of interesting things come out of this in terms of the reply. If you look at the salary values of the different players, first of all, you had a common comparator. In Puljujärvi at 4.15 million. Now, that doesn't happen very often, that the club and the player have a common comparator. But if you have a common comparator, you really want to focus on that in the reply. And that particularly helps the player. It doesn't help the club very much, because the club council might have thought maybe I should have gone for a lower, even though I can't have as good statistical comparison, I should have gone for a lower value contract than that one to be one of the comparators, because that gives the player side an opportunity to really emphasize how reasonable their presentation is and their statistical comparison, and they're not too far apart in money, and the club is way behind that particular common comparator. The other comparator which the club was using was Connor Brown at 3.6 million, and that's bang on what you wanted. So in the reply, you want to focus on the fact, look, Mr. Arbitrator, the club has chosen a comparator, which is exactly what we're presenting as our position in salary arbitration. So that's an important point to make. And I always used to enjoy, when I did these things, the salary arbitration rebuttals by the Players Association, because they were exceedingly good at doing that, and exactly what they would have done. They would go for the points that are really emphasized in the other side's presentation that support their position. But that comes with experience, and it also requires you to attack the other side, which I'm sure is a process that you haven't really learned that much about at this stage in dealing with these kind of problems and in your life, but is an important part of arbitration proceedings and legal proceedings and argument about outcomes. Before I go and talk to each of you for a moment individually, is there any questions you want to throw at me about what went on or what I just said? If not, I'll move on and talk with each of you. Okay, that's fine. I'll just go in the order that everybody appeared. So, Fiona. You did a very good job, Fiona. Just trying to locate you on the screen. There you are. I was impressed with your presentation. It was well done. You were going a little too fast. And particularly when you're dealing with statistics, you have to slow down and pick the statistics. And in your case, I think if you'd taken a little less statistics to support the positions you're in terms of how you're describing the particular player at arbitration as being comparable, would be a better and more effective. It wasn't that you weren't effective, it's just that you need to tie the statistics. You don't need to cover all the statistics, just a few strong ones that really support your argument that 3.6 is the right number for this particular player. And when you did the reply, as I suggested, I think you really could have gone after the other side, because their competitors in some respects supported your position, I thought. And you didn't particularly recognize that you went to the statistical analysis again, which is what your case was based on. I understand that. But well done, very good job. Sorry, I was trying to make notes as I went along. Unfortunately, Angela, part of your presentation was affected by technical difficulties, and I don't know if you were aware of it, but on my screen, I was getting quadruple images of you
Sorry.
across the top. It's not your fault. These things happen, but it made it a little bit harder for me to really evaluate your presentation as well as it could have. And so the technical difficulties did detract from your presentation. That's entirely not your fault, of course. I think your overview and your introduction was done very effectively, and then the rest of it, you did a good job. But it was hard for me to really follow everything that was being said, because you were frozen on several occasions, and then I'd catch up and I'd miss something in between. So, but I thought overall you did a very good presentation, and well done. Let's go to the club players. James, started off. I like the idea of trying to tie your presentation to verbal concepts. So you have your three pillars, and you have your three analysis based on those, and you do your statistical comparison tied back to it. But just the same as with the plaintiffs didn't, I think, focus enough on tying the stats to the actual dollar numbers, because at the end of the day, I have to decide what the salary should be, not the statistics. All the statistics do is put the comparators either in the pool for consideration or not in the pool for consideration. And after that, it's an analysis of the salary range, that because what you've got is a range of salaries. You have to select one as the arbitrator. So the pillars were well done, and they were tied to statistics, and you could have emphasized a bit more the statistics. And I think you probably would have gone to comment even before the reply in some of the things that the player had said. That's certainly permitted in these kind of circumstances, but I'm sure that's something that you'll have to learn going forward. It's not something that you can start off with. So I thought you did a very good job. And I also wondered, and this I would ask of all of you, I had the feeling that all of you were looking at electronic information in front of you. Nothing wrong with that, and this is very hard to do. This is one of the reasons I don't actually like doing arbitration work virtually. And now that the pandemic's over, I try not to do it virtually. I do it in person, because you have much more impact when you can actually see the person, you're with the person. But when you're doing it virtually, try and look at me, which I know that's hard to do on a virtual system. At the very flat screen, you don't get the same sense of what you're saying and what I'm thinking while the case is going. And that's not a comment against any of you. That's a comment about just using Zoom or other forms of platforms versus in person, which, as I already said, I much prefer. Okay, I think that's it for you, James. Then we're over here. Yeah. I'm sorry, how do I pronounce your first name?
Yuhong.
Yuhong. Okay, sorry for that. Thank you. You picked up on the two of the three pillars, and you did a good job on that. I thought you had a couple comments in your remarks that could have been emphasized more, and that was the value of a player to a team. I don't mean in a monetary sense, but the value, how valuable is a penalty killer versus someone who's a high scorer but useless on the penalty. Those sorts of ideas about what the stats show would have strengthened your position. I'm curious why you selected such a high value player as being one of your comparators. Well, I think that's the main things I wanted to say. Yeah. So now I guess you have to. I have to decide what I'm going to decide, or tell you what I'm going to decide, and without going through all of the details that I've been presented with, I would come to the conclusion. I think that the player's position is justified, and that 3.6 million, the club was a little low, but the club's comparators were much closer to where the player was than they were to their position. And overall, I think I would award the route to the Players' Council. That doesn't mean that the other side lost. It's a very close call. And I think maybe a little harder to have supported the club's position. And in the actual arbitrations that I see, there's usually a much clearer demarcation between the two sides than there was here. And that's why I made those comments about reply. Once you have common, I always look for common comparators, because they tell you more about the thinking behind the positions of both parties than all the other players that could be in the pool of comparators. So that's it from my end, but I'm happy to answer any questions you have or any comments you have or anything else you'd like to ask me. I'd be pleased to answer them for you.
Thank you so much for judging and volunteering your time. I had a question, which was, you mentioned like baseball and hockey arbitration are super different. Which one do you think you prefer to arbitrate, or you prefer to work within?
Well, that's a good question. First of all, I should say, while I was offered, I never did salary arbitrations for Major League Baseball, but I did do the Major League Baseball drugs inquiry in 2007, 2008 with Senator Mitchell, American senator, for the Major League Baseball players. And the difference between hockey and baseball when it comes to salary arbitration, the